It all started on a regular Tuesday, just like any other. I was sitting in my living room, sipping on my morning coffee, and flipping through some old family photos. It's funny how those moments can make you feel both comforted and lonely at the same time. My nephew Derek had come over the night before to drop off some things I had left at his house. We'd had a nice dinner together, just the two of us, and he'd been his usual charming self. He was the kind of guy who could talk his way into anything, or at least that's what I thought. I was never really close to him until his parents died a few years back, and I took him in. He was in his 20s, barely starting out in life, and I couldn't leave him out there on his own. I guess I thought we had a special bond after all that. I should have known something was off when I noticed the letter. It had been on the kitchen counter, mixed in with a pile of papers I hadn't gotten around to going through yet. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something told me I needed to take a closer look. The envelope was from an insurance company. I didn't recognize the name of the company, but that wasn't the part that sent a chill down my spine. I opened it and read the letter inside. The content was as formal as you'd expect an insurance document to be, but there was something strange about the language. They were notifying me about a life insurance policy that had been taken out in my name, a policy that I didn't remember signing. At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake or scam. Maybe someone had gotten a hold of my information, maybe it was fraud. But as I kept reading, my heart started pounding in my chest. It was no mistake. The policy wasn't just for a small amount either. No, this one was for a substantial payout, enough that someone might go to extreme lengths to get their hands on it. And then, as I looked down at the fine print, I saw the beneficiary, Derek, my nephew. I stood there frozen, staring at the paper in my hands. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Derek? I couldn't believe it. Why would he do this? My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Sure, he'd been asking me to help with money here and there. And yeah, he'd always said things like, "Don't worry, I've got it covered." But this was something else entirely. This wasn't just asking for help. This was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't even fathom. But the worst part was still to come. As I read through the document again, I saw something even more sinister. The policy wasn't just a regular life insurance plan. It was meant to cover an accidental death. There were detailed instructions about how the claim could be processed in the event of an accident. And that's when the pieces started to fall into place. My nephew, who had always been so sweet and helpful in front of me, was planning to kill me. He was going to stage an accident and cash in on my death. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring at that letter, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Derek had always been a bit of a disappointment, but I never imagined him capable of something like this. I'd put so much into helping him get his life together after his parents died. I had given him financial support, let him live with me when he had nowhere else to go. I had been there for him through every setback and every struggle. And this was how he repaid me? By planning my murder for money, I felt a coldness spread through me. The man I'd taken into my home, the boy I had helped raise after tragedy struck his family, was now plotting my death for financial gain. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel real. I kept asking myself how I could have missed all the signs. How could I have been so blind? Then, like a sudden punch in the gut, a horrifying thought hit me. Had this been his plan all along? Was everything he'd done for the past few years just a part of his scheme to get me to trust him, to get me to let my guard down? I felt so stupid, so naive. How could I have been so foolish to think that he actually cared about me? This wasn't just about money. It was about control, manipulation, and a complete disregard for family. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't just sit here and do nothing while Derek continued with his plan. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. But I had to be smart about it. If I confronted him directly, he'd know I knew, and it could backfire. No, I had to stay calm, gather more information, and make sure that when I exposed him, I would have everything I needed to ensure he couldn't wriggle out of it. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not after everything I had done for him. I folded the letter carefully, feeling the weight of its contents settle in my chest. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was my life on the line. It was everything I had built, everything I had worked for, and everything I had sacrificed. I had been a fool, but now I knew the truth. And with that truth, I would make sure Derek paid for what he had done. The days following my shocking discovery were a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living in some twisted dream, where everything I thought I knew about family was a lie. Derek's actions haunted me, and every time I saw him, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of betrayal. But what shook me even more was how normal he acted. Almost too normal. It started the day after I found the insurance policy. Derek came over as usual, with his casual smile and the easygoing demeanor he'd always had. He knocked on my door as if nothing had changed, and when I answered, he acted like nothing was out of the ordinary. He seemed almost eager to see me. I could tell something was off, but I couldn't place it. He offered me a warm hug, asked how I was doing, and before I could even gather my thoughts, he was talking about how I should take it easy and let him help me out more often. "Hey, Aunt Carol," he said, casually tossing a set of keys on the kitchen counter. "I was thinking, why don't you take my car for a while? So you don't have to drive that old thing around. It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." I froze for a second. Why would he offer me his car out of the blue? I had always been perfectly fine with my own, and while I appreciated the gesture, it felt a little off. He insisted, though, that I'd be more comfortable in his car, and I couldn't find a reason to say no. After all, he was being so thoughtful. He had always been good at hiding his true intentions behind a mask of charm. I thanked him and accepted, though my gut was screaming at me that something wasn't right. But how could I confront him? I didn't want to create a scene, not yet anyway. I had to be careful. I had to think this through. The next few days were an odd mixture of normalcy and tension. Derek called frequently, checking in on me, asking if I was enjoying his car, and offering to take me out for lunch or run errands for me. It was almost as if he were trying to make up for something. But the more he tried, the more I realized this was all part of his act. This wasn't genuine concern. This was calculated. He was trying to play the part of the loving nephew to keep me off balance, to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I was imagining things. I began to pay closer attention to every word he said, every gesture, and every offer he made. And the more I watched, the more I saw how carefully he orchestrated his caring act. His tone was always overly sweet, like a salesman trying to close a deal. His eyes would linger just a little too long when he asked how I was doing, as if waiting for me to let my guard down, to trust him. It didn't stop with the car either. He insisted on picking up my groceries, helping me with chores around the house, and even suggested that I stay with him for a few days to rest. He was practically living in my home, his face plastered with that same smile, his hands constantly offering help, like he was trying to convince me I needed him. I wasn't sure if he was playing me or if he honestly believed that I would buy into the charade. Either way, it was all starting to feel suffocating. The worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all leading somewhere, that his overt displays of kindness weren't just out of the goodness of his heart. They were calculated. I had seen it all before in other people who had hidden agendas. I'd been taken advantage of before, but never by someone I thought I could trust so completely, never by someone who was supposed to be family. But still, I played along. I didn't want to make him suspicious. If he thought I was buying into his act, I might be able to catch him slipping up. I couldn't afford to let him know that I was on to him. As hard as it was, I kept up the pretense of gratitude and acceptance. I let him help with things, even though deep down, I was just waiting for the moment when I could prove what I suspected all along. Derek wasn't here because he cared about me. He was here because he had a plan, and I was the target. It wasn't until I saw the way he looked at me, a glint of something almost too eager in his eyes, that I truly understood. I wasn't just a family member to him anymore. I was a means to an end, a pawn in his dangerous game, and I was going to have to outplay him before it was too late. Despite all the kind words, the offers of help, and the seemingly endless gestures of concern, I couldn't ignore the one truth. Derek wasn't here to take care of me. He was here to make sure I'd never see the light of day again. The sooner I accepted that, the sooner I could start to figure out how to stop him. I will never forget the way my hands shook as I walked out of Greg's shop. The moment he pointed out the damage to Derek's car, everything I had feared, all the bad feelings that had been gnawing at me for days, finally clicked into place. I had always trusted Derek. Hell, I raised him after his parents passed away. He was like a son to me, and I had helped him whenever he needed it. But everything changed the day I discovered that Derek had taken out a life insurance policy on me, planning to kill me for a quick payout. It wasn't like I had no suspicions. In the days leading up to my discovery, I had started noticing small, strange things. For one, Derek's behavior had been different, almost too kind, if that makes sense. He had always been a bit of a charmer, but there was something in the way he acted now that felt off. He was offering to do things for me, asking if I needed anything. At first, I thought it was just him being sweet, maybe because I'd been a little under the weather, but I started to wonder. And then there was the car. He had told me several times that I should use his car if I needed it, that it was more reliable than my old sedan. Derek had always been a bit of a car guy, constantly upgrading his vehicles and boasting about their condition. He was so proud of that car, always insisting it was the best one in the world, perfect for any situation. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Every time I drove it, I heard those strange, grinding noises coming from the brakes. It was subtle at first, like a faint squeal when I pressed down on the pedal, but it never went away. I ignored it at first, thinking it was just a little wear and tear, until I started feeling something more, a growing sense of dread that settled into my bones. After I found out about the life insurance policy, everything came into focus. Derek wasn't just being helpful by offering me the car, he was laying the groundwork for a deadly plan. The moment I realized what he had done, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait. I had to take action, and I had to do it fast. I didn't want to go straight to Derek and confront him, not yet. I had to be sure that he had really done what I thought he had done. That's when I decided to take the car to Greg, my trusted mechanic. He had worked on all my vehicles over the years, and I knew he'd tell me the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. The day I dropped off the car at Greg's shop, I tried to keep my nerves in check. I didn't mention anything specific about Derek's behavior or the possible tampering. I simply asked Greg for a routine inspection, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I handed over the keys, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something awful. Greg called me a few hours later. The calmness in his voice couldn't hide the seriousness of what he had to tell me. "Carol, you need to come by the shop. There's something you need to see," he said, and I immediately felt my stomach churn. I could feel the weight of dread pressing down on me as I drove over to the shop, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, Greg led me over to Derek's car, now raised on the lift in the middle of the garage. He looked at me, his expression serious, and then pointed to the brake system, which had been exposed for inspection. "I'm not going to beat around the bush, Carol," Greg said. "Whoever did this wasn't an accident. These brakes were intentionally sabotaged. Look at this wear, the uneven grinding. It's like someone deliberately tampered with them, ground them down to a point where they wouldn't hold up under pressure. It's clear that someone wanted this car to fail at a very specific time, probably when you were driving it." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I could barely breathe as I stood there, staring at the damaged brake system. Every rational part of me screamed that this couldn't be real, that I was just imagining it. But deep down, I knew it was true. Derek had done this. He had intentionally sabotaged the car's brakes, all to set me up for an accident. I looked at Greg, struggling to find my voice. What does this mean? What should I do? Greg's eyes softened. and he looked at me with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Carol, if you'd been driving this car on the wrong road at the wrong time, you wouldn't be here right now. This was no accident. Someone wanted you gone. And it's not a coincidence that Derek's been so helpful lately. You need to be careful." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Every instinct told me this was the beginning of something much darker. I had always trusted Derek, but now I could see him for what he really was. A cold, calculating person willing to betray his own family for money. I asked Greg to keep quiet about the details of the inspection. I wasn't ready to confront Derek, not yet. I needed more time to think, to figure out my next move. I felt so angry and hurt, but I also knew that if I confronted Derek now, he would have an excuse, a way to weasel his way out of it. I couldn't give him that chance. So I went home that night, a storm brewing inside me. The shock of everything hadn't worn off yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Derek get away with this. He had planned for me to die, and I would make sure that he paid for it. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal. I had spent years looking out for him, helping him when he needed it. And this is how he repaid me. This was no longer just a betrayal of trust. This was an attempt on my life. But I would make sure that Derek didn't win. I wasn't going to be his victim. I would get the truth out, expose him for who he really was, and put an end to his plans. It was time to take control. It was time to make him regret ever thinking he could get away with this. I had spent days thinking about how to handle Derek. Confronting him right away felt like a rash decision, and I wasn't about to let my emotions dictate my next move. No, this required precision, careful planning, and, above all, patience. I knew I had to play it smart to turn the tables in a way that would leave Derek no room to squirm out of the mess he had created. He thought he had me cornered, but he had no idea what I had in store. It wasn't just about exposing him. It was about making him feel the weight of his own actions. And I would do it without him even knowing what hit him. I decided the best way to get back at Derek was to hit him where it hurt, his pride and his health. I had known for a while that Derek had a weakness for rich, unhealthy food. He had always prided himself on his physique, but I had seen how he'd started to let things slide in the past few years. Too much takeout, too many late nights with junk food. His health was already in decline, though he'd never admit it. The first time I noticed his shaky breath after he ate something greasy, I knew. He was vulnerable. It wasn't a matter of giving him food to make him sick immediately. No, I wasn't interested in that. It was much more subtle than that. I needed to slow things down, let time do its work. I was going to manipulate him with food, and he wouldn't even realize it until it was too late. For the next few weeks, I started preparing the kind of meals Derek couldn't resist. Deep-fried chicken, rich cream sauces, butter-drenched pasta, decadent desserts. I made sure to prepare them just right, something his body couldn't refuse. Derek had always been the first to praise my cooking, always excited when I offered to make something special. He never suspected my true motives. He just ate, oblivious to the fact that every meal I put in front of him was a small, quiet step toward his downfall. At first, everything seemed normal. Derek would come over to my house for dinner, sit at my kitchen table with that smug smile of his, and chat away about his work and his big plans. He'd devour everything I placed before him without a second thought, complimenting my skills, praising how great the food was. I would smile sweetly, pretending I was just the loving aunt, doing what I always did, but inside I was calculating every bite he took. Each forkful was a piece of the puzzle I was slowly assembling. I noticed the effects taking their toll after a few days. Derek, who had always been so energetic and sure of himself, started looking a little sluggish. He complained about feeling tired all the time. His once perfect posture began to slouch, and the bags under his eyes became darker. It was subtle at first, easy to brush off as the result of stress from work or the pressure of his scheming. But I could see through it all. The food was beginning to wear him down. weakening his body slowly but steadily, just as I had planned. I kept feeding him, knowing it wouldn't be long before the effects were undeniable. He started avoiding physical activity, opting to stay on the couch after meals, instead of heading to the gym like he used to. It was as if his body was telling him to slow down, to rest, and he obeyed without realizing that I had become the cause of his weariness. There was a part of me that hated doing this, watching him deteriorate, even if it was just a slow burn. But then I would remember what he had planned for me. Derek had tried to orchestrate my death for financial gain, and here I was still standing, still in control. He had given me no choice but to take matters into my own hands, and this was my way of doing it without resorting to violence. This was my revenge, the kind that would make him suffer without any trace of what I had done. On some nights, when Derek stayed for dinner and I watched him eat with that same oblivious grin, I felt a strange sense of power. It was like I was the puppet master, and he was dancing to my tune, completely unaware. But I knew this was only the beginning. I wasn't going to stop at just a few meals. I would continue feeding him, each plate an additional blow to his physical and mental state, until he had no choice but to face the reality of what was happening. But there was more to my plan. I wasn't just going to weaken Derek physically, I also needed to shake his confidence. He had been so sure of himself, so proud of his control over his life. But as his health began to falter, I knew he would start to question everything, especially when it became clear that his normal tricks weren't working. His plan to get rid of me and claim that life insurance would begin to feel more like a dream, he couldn't quite grasp. At the same time, I was still pretending to be the loving aunt who cared for him. I kept up the charade, still playing the part of the sweet, doting family member. I made sure to stay calm, to keep things friendly and warm, just as I had always done. But inside, I was watching, waiting, calculating my next move. I knew that once I had weakened Derek enough, once he started feeling the effects of his own actions and couldn't hide it anymore, I would strike. And when the time came, I would be ready to confront him, to reveal everything, to make sure he understood just how far I was willing to go, to ensure he faced the consequences of his betrayal. For now, though, I kept up the charade, letting Derek enjoy the fruits of his own ignorance. He was playing right into my hands, and he didn't even know it. I had the upper hand, and it felt good to finally have control over the situation. It was a late Friday evening when Derek invited me to take a drive with him out of town. He said he wanted to show me something, a surprise he'd been working on. Of course, I didn't trust him anymore, but I knew I couldn't let on that I knew what he was planning. He had been acting a bit strange lately, as if trying to make up for something, or maybe he just didn't want to arouse suspicion. Either way, I agreed to go. I had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Derek would think he had me in his grasp, the moment when he would try to finish what he'd started. And I had been preparing for it in secret, studying every move he made. I knew Derek was going to try something during this trip. He thought I was clueless, but I had been watching him closely. The car ride started innocently enough. Derek chattered away about work, about some new business idea he was trying to hatch. I could tell he was trying to act normal, but there was something off about his demeanor. It was almost like he was too calm, too composed. I kept my thoughts to myself, letting him ramble as we drove along the dark road, miles away from the nearest town. We were in the middle of nowhere, just the car's headlights cutting through the dense, shadowy woods around us. It was the perfect place for an accident to look like an accident. Derek knew exactly what he was doing. As the road curved, I could feel the tension in the air. It was as if he were waiting for the right moment, knowing that he had engineered everything to unfold in a way that would be irreversible. The moment came faster than I expected. Derek took a sharp turn, and I could hear the screech of the tires as the car suddenly jerked to the side. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. The brakes, those broken brakes I'd inspected earlier, were not working. Derek had timed it perfectly. His plan was coming to fruition. But what he didn't know was that I had done my own work. Before I even stepped into his car, I had checked the brakes myself, just like I always did before going anywhere with him. And I had tampered with them, just enough to make sure that if he tried anything, he'd be the one paying for it. I knew exactly where the weak points were, and I knew just how much pressure to apply. Derek thought he had me trapped, but I was one step ahead. I pretended to panic, my heart racing as the car swerved uncontrollably, making it look like I was terrified. I didn't want Derek to know that I was on to him. I played the part, gasping and clutching the armrest, my voice shaking as I asked what was happening. Derek, of course, acted completely calm, pretending like nothing was wrong, trying to reassure me, but it was too late. The car careened off the road, the tires screeching loudly, and in that moment I knew it was now or never. The car hit a patch of dirt, and I felt it slow down slightly, but I wasn't about to wait for the disaster to unfold. With a quick, deliberate motion, I grabbed the handle of the passenger door, which I'd made sure was unlocked earlier. Derek was still trying to steer the car back onto the road, thinking he could pull it off. He wasn't paying attention to me anymore. This was my chance. Without a moment's hesitation, I swung open the door and tumbled out of the car, hitting the cold dirt road with a roll to protect myself. I could hear the screech of the tires as Derek desperately tried to regain control of the car, but it was too late. The car was already off the road, and the next sound I heard was the soft, sickening crunch of metal hitting a tree. I lay there in the dark for a moment, listening to the aftermath. The car was still, and I could hear Derek muttering to himself inside. I quickly got to my feet and ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get away from him, far away. I had to make sure he didn't realize I'd escaped, that he didn't have a chance to stop me. The adrenaline was rushing through me, and I didn't look back. I ran for what felt like miles through the woods, every step fueled by the fear of what Derek would do if he realized what I had done. I didn't even know where I was going, but I had to keep moving. As I ran, my mind raced. I had done it, I had escaped. But there was still so much to do. Derek had tried to kill me, and now I had to make sure he couldn't get away with it. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of relief. I was alive, and Derek's plan had failed. I didn't stop running until I found a small clearing where I could catch my breath. My body was shaking, and my mind was still reeling from the fact that I had narrowly escaped death. It was only then that I realized I had made it out of his trap, and now I had to figure out how to make sure Derek would pay for what he had tried to do. I had run for what felt like hours, my breath ragged as I stumbled through the dense woods. The adrenaline still pumped through my veins, but the weight of what had just happened was settling in. Derek had tried to kill me. I knew it. And now I was alone in the middle of nowhere, with no idea where I was or how far I had gone. My legs ached, and I was starting to feel the effects of the exhaustion. In the distance, through the trees, I saw a flicker of movement, a figure stumbling toward me. It wasn't Derek. I would have known his footsteps by now. This was someone else, and I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do, but my instincts told me to be cautious. The figure grew closer, and I could see that it was a man. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, though it was clearly disheveled from his fall. His shoes were scuffed, and he looked like he had been injured, but despite the circumstances, he moved with surprising composure. It wasn't the typical image of someone who found themselves stranded in the woods, and it instantly piqued my curiosity. When he finally reached me, he stopped for a moment to catch his breath. His face was pale, and his forehead was slick with sweat, but his eyes were calm, almost too calm for someone who seemed to be in distress. He looked at me and smiled faintly, though there was a hint of pain behind his expression. "You're quite a sight," he said, his voice low but clear. "I wasn't expecting company out here." I hesitated for a moment, still unsure about him. But I didn't have much choice. I was exhausted, and I needed help. I gave him a cautious smile and offered my assistance. "You look like you've had a rough time. Are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "I took a bit of a fall. It's nothing too serious, but I'm not sure how far I can go on my own. Would you mind helping me get to safety?" I wasn't sure whether it was the kindness in his voice or the exhaustion clouding my judgment, but I agreed. We both helped each other as we slowly made our way through the woods, the evening air cool and thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. As we walked, I found myself learning more about him. His name was Edward Mitchell, and as he explained, he was a business tycoon and philanthropist who had been hiking in the area when he slipped on a loose rock and twisted his ankle. It wasn't the kind of thing I'd expect from someone so high up in the world of business, but then again, I had learned not to judge a book by its cover. There was something about him, though, a quiet confidence in his words, a sense of control that I couldn't quite shake. We talked as we walked, though it was mostly me listening, trying to ignore the thoughts of Derek that kept creeping into my mind. Edward seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, asking me questions about my life, my family. For a moment, I almost felt like everything was normal again. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to dying at Derek's hands. It weighed on me, but I didn't let it show. Edward didn't need to know the truth of what had just happened, not yet. It wasn't long before we stumbled upon a small, secluded cabin nestled between the trees. Edward's eyes lit up when he saw it. "There it is," he said, with a soft sigh of relief. "I have a place here where I sometimes come to get away. I'll be safe there for the night at least." We carefully made our way inside, and I helped him sit down on a couch, his legs stretched out. I couldn't help but notice the luxury of the place: rich wood furniture, plush rugs, and large windows that offered a stunning view of the surrounding forest. It was a peaceful escape from the chaos that had been my life for the past few days. Edward winced as he adjusted his position, and I felt a pang of sympathy for him. "I'll get you some water," I offered, heading toward the small kitchen area. As I fetched the water, I noticed Edward watching me, his gaze more focused than before. When I returned, he spoke again, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I know this may sound strange," he began, "but I couldn't help but notice the way you acted back there, how you handled the situation. It's clear you've been through something difficult, and it's also clear to me that you're not the kind of person to let life walk all over you." I paused, unsure where he was going with this. "What do you mean?" Edward leaned forward, his eyes intense now. "You're smarter than most people I know. I don't know your story, but I have a feeling there's more to it than you're letting on. If you're in trouble, and I can tell you are, maybe I can help. I have resources, connections. I could help you take control of whatever's going on." I was taken aback by his offer. Here was a man I had just met, someone who seemed to have his life in order despite being stuck in the woods, offering his help to me, a stranger. But there was something in his demeanor that made me believe he wasn't just being kind for the sake of kindness. "I don't know if I can explain everything right now," I said cautiously, "but I'll take you up on that offer. I need help, more than you know." Edward nodded, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "Take your time. When you're ready, I'll be here." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all. Maybe I had someone who could help me fight back, someone who could help me take down Derek and expose his plans. I didn't know exactly how Edward could assist me yet, but I had a feeling this chance encounter was the turning point I'd been waiting for. After spending a few more days in Edward's cabin, recuperating from the emotional and physical toll the whole situation had taken on me, I finally felt ready. I'd gathered my thoughts, and more importantly, I'd gathered the evidence I needed to confront Derek. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him destroy my life or make me feel like I was powerless anymore. I had spent hours with Edward, organizing everything: my bank records, the insurance documents, and all the receipts that showed Derek's involvement in every step of the plan. I had hired a private investigator during my time at the cabin, who had traced Derek's steps for weeks. The investigator had discovered that Derek had been using my personal information to set up the insurance policy. down to the last detail about my medical history and my daily habits. It was all there in black and white. Derek had planned this carefully, and now I had the proof that would unravel everything. It was time. I left the cabin with a sense of finality in my heart. Edward had promised to stand by me, but I had to face Derek alone. He had betrayed me, and it was my responsibility to make him pay for what he had done. I arrived back at my house late in the afternoon, the sky dimming into twilight. The house felt cold and foreign now, even though I had lived there for years. It was like everything had changed, like I was no longer the same person who had walked through those doors only weeks before. Derek hadn't called or reached out to me. I had no idea what he thought, but I had a gut feeling he was planning something. It didn't matter, though. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I opened the front door and stepped inside, my heart pounding. I could hear Derek's voice before I even saw him. He was in the living room, pacing, talking to himself. It was clear that he was waiting for me to return, probably with some sort of apology or explanation. But I was done listening to him. I walked into the living room, and when Derek saw me, he froze for a second. His eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or recognition that things were about to change. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't let him get a word out. "I know what you've been doing, Derek," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I know about the insurance policy. I know about the plan you set up to kill me for the payout. And I know you've been lying to me for months." His face twisted into an expression of disbelief, and for a moment I thought he might deny it, but he didn't. He just stood there, frozen in place, his eyes darting around the room like he was trying to figure out what to do next. "You don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, his voice shaking slightly. "This is insane. You—" "Stop," I cut him off. "I have all the evidence I need. The investigator, the documents, the emails you sent to the insurance company. Everything. It's all here." I held up the folder in my hand, letting him see the contents, the proof of his betrayal. Derek's face turned pale. I could see his mind racing as he tried to come up with some excuse, some way to wiggle out of it. But I wasn't going to give him the chance. "You planned to have me killed, Derek," I continued, my voice hardening. "And I don't know what kind of person you've become, but I won't let you get away with this. Not anymore. You don't get to walk away from this, and I'm not going to make it easy for you." He looked like he might speak again, but the words failed him. Instead, he just stood there, trembling slightly. For a moment, there was complete silence, the weight of the truth hanging between us like a heavy fog. Finally, Derek slumped into the armchair, his head in his hands. I could see the defeat in his posture. He knew I was right. He knew there was no way out of this. His actions had caught up with him, and now the consequences were unavoidable. I stood there for a moment, watching him. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy for him. After all, he was my nephew, the person I had raised, loved, and supported. But as I looked at him now, I realized that the person he had become wasn't someone I could pity. He had chosen his path, and I had to hold him accountable. "You're not the person I thought you were," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "I spent years helping you, Derek. I gave you everything I had, and this is how you repay me?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I could see the guilt eating him alive, but there was nothing left to say. The damage was done. I handed him the folder, and without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. He had already shown me the man he was, and now it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. As I walked outside, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over yet. I still had to deal with the legal fallout, but I had done what needed to be done. Derek's life would never be the same, but neither would mine. I knew I was ready to move forward, no matter what came next. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control of my life again, and that was all I needed to start anew. The days after I confronted Derek were filled with an overwhelming sense of clarity. As much as I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders, there was still an undercurrent of anxiety, the kind that comes with upheaval, with change. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also left me shaken. Derek was gone from my life, and that reality was settling in, piece by piece. I knew there was no turning back, no mending the bond we once had, but that was okay. In many ways, it felt like the beginning of something new, even if I didn't fully understand what it was yet. I spent the next few days in a fog of reflection, trying to process everything that had happened. I stayed at home, pacing between the windows of my living room, watching the sunlight dapples on the floor. The world outside seemed calm, almost indifferent to the storm that had passed through my life. But I was different now. I had endured betrayal at the hands of someone I loved, and I had come out stronger. It was time for me to embrace that strength and start living for myself, without the weight of guilt, obligation, or fear. Edward had stayed in touch during all this, checking in with me and offering support. He'd been there, not as a savior, but as a calm, steady presence when I needed it most. We had gone on long walks, often in silence, but there was a quiet understanding between us that felt comforting. He had been through his own struggles, and in many ways, he understood what it was like to have everything change in an instant. But he also understood the need to rebuild, to move forward and take back control. It wasn't long before I realized how much I had neglected my own needs over the years. My entire life had been devoted to taking care of others. First my parents, then Derek and his family, and even friends who needed support. I had always prided myself on being the pillar, the strong one who could handle anything. But I had never once asked myself what I needed, what I wanted. Now, as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea and watching the morning sun rise over the horizon, I began to consider what a life built just for me might look like. I started small. I'd always loved gardening, but had never found the time for it between all the obligations I'd carried for years. I pulled out my old gardening tools and spent the afternoon in my backyard, planting flowers and organizing the small vegetable garden I had once dreamed of. The dirt between my fingers felt grounding, calming. It wasn't anything grand, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. I was doing it because it brought me peace. The next week, I joined a local book club. I had always loved to read, but I hadn't indulged that passion in years. The idea of meeting new people, of sharing my thoughts with others, felt exciting. I attended the first meeting with a mix of nervousness and curiosity, and as soon as I walked in, I felt a connection to the group of women there. We discussed our current books, but there was also a sense of camaraderie that I hadn't realized I was missing. It felt good to be around people who didn't know me for my past, who didn't expect anything from me other than to be myself. For the first time in a long while, I realized that I could just be me without all the burdens I had carried for so many years. As the weeks passed, I started taking more time for myself. I would go for walks in the park, spend afternoons in the library, and even treated myself to a spa day. Something I'd never done before. The little things were beginning to add up. They were helping me rebuild my confidence, helping me remember who I was before I became someone's caretaker, someone's problem solver. But more than anything, I learned to appreciate the quiet moments. There were no more frantic phone calls from Derek, no more demands on my time. I had time to listen to my own thoughts again, to remember what it felt like to simply be. And that was something I'd nearly forgotten. How to just exist without the weight of the world on my shoulders. Edward continued to support me, but I realized that his presence didn't define me. I didn't need him to fix me or to give me the validation I once sought from others. What I needed now was to rediscover my own value, to remember that I was enough, just as I was. There were still days when I felt the sting of what Derek had done, but those moments were becoming fewer. Each day, I was learning how to let go of the anger, the hurt, and the fear. Each day, I was reclaiming the peace that had once been lost. By the time summer rolled around, I felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. I had rebuilt the parts of myself that had been broken, and I was living a life that was entirely mine. I wasn't looking back anymore. I wasn't waiting for Derek or anyone else to change my narrative. I was the one writing my story now, and for the first time in years, I felt the joy of living on my own terms. Life was still uncertain, but I had found a way to embrace it. I had found a new rhythm, a new sense of freedom, and I was no longer bound by the expectations of others. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. After confronting Derek, I focused on myself. My garden became my peace, a place to reflect and rebuild. I started small, taking cooking classes and reconnecting with old friends. With Edward's quiet support, I learned to enjoy life on my own terms. The more I embraced my independence, the more confident I became. I no longer needed anyone's approval, and I felt free for the first time in years. Looking ahead, I felt hopeful about the future, knowing I was ready to face whatever came next.